Man, oh man. Oh man, I was in it. Man, I felt like, listen, I felt like I was in a car driving, just balling 50 miles an hour. I was just going. And then I wasn't even looking at the comment section. Comment section was, I wasn't even paying attention. And then somebody texted me and was like, your sound is off. So that's first time for everything they say. All right. All right, good. That was a good warm up. Let's get into this, man. Let's get into this. First things first. Welcome to CNN. I'm Kirk Kennedy. Let's go in. All right. I'm just going to say this. Whenever I do talks like this, because people are so theological, right? They're so, even if they're Christians, they're more political than they are biblical, right? They're so theological. So they immediately, anytime you say anything immediately, let me just say this, two things I want to say. One, I'm not on the woke left or the sleep right. All right. I don't bang with either of them. I think politics today in modern society has become divisive, and I'm of the Christian tradition when we're about unity and we work hard to reconcile and keep unity in place. So I'm not on the woke left or the sleep right. I've never voted Democrat in my life and would never vote for them. And I don't trust the conservatives either. So that, I just want to put that out there on the front end. What I do in my videos and where I get this idea of staying balanced from, it comes from this verse right here. Take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. This is Ephesians 5:11. So my job is to expose the deeds of darkness. So I will call out the left and the right like I'm a scarecrow pointing in both directions in the Wizard of Oz. All of them. My hope is in the Lord. It's all, and I'm not telling anyone you gotta be like me. This is my conviction. My conviction. I cannot care for people and have a divisive. I'm just about unity. I get that people feel a certain way, and I try to help people and all those things. All right. Having said that, let's get into this. I watched as many of you probably have. I feel like I'm talking real. I think I'm talking all loud because I'm hyped because I just spent 30 minutes saying this. But the other day, I watched Larry Elder on The Breakfast Club. And I was like, oh boy, as soon as I saw that show up on my Twitter, my YouTube algorithm, I was like, here we go. I already knew what to expect. And it was pretty much what I thought. It was a dumpster fire. Now, many people, in my timeline, in my algorithm, I saw a lot of people saying stuff like, as a matter of fact, all the videos that I saw were Larry Elder destroyed Charlamagne and the guy and all of the Breakfast Club and all of that, right? I was saying he destroyed the Breakfast Club. And in all honesty, I do have to say on some level, I agree. The highlight to me was when Charlamagne tried to hit him at the end, like basically insinuating you a black man that don't know you controlled by white people. And when he hit him back with but when Joe Biden came on your show and said that, if you ain't black, if you vote for him, you weren't offended, you ain't. Brilliant. Because I know when I saw that, when Joe Biden said that, I don't vote Democrat, period. But I was offended. You know what I'm saying? I was tempted by that. So I thought that was good. But as I looked at, I didn't watch many people's take on the issue, but a lot of people seem to think Larry Elder destroyed the Breakfast Club. And I think, okay, I can see why people say that. I think he made some points, but I guess I saw it a little bit differently. And because I use Ephesians 5:11 and expose the deeds of darkness, I just want to do an open letter to both Charlamagne and Larry Elder about some things. And we just, and I'm nobody to them. You don't need to, they might not even see this. I don't care. But if you're watching, thank you. I appreciate you. But we get ready to go in. And if you're new to my channel, buckle up because I go in. All right. First to Charlamagne the God. Charlamagne started off with talking about systemic racism. And then when Larry Elder asked him, said he disagreed that systemic racism is real. And he asked him, what's an example? What's the greatest example you can think of? I'm paraphrasing. Don't say, hey, that's not what he said. He didn't say greatest. I don't want to hear that, man. If you on them terms, don't watch me, right? I'm just paraphrasing. But And Charlamagne was like, oh, there's a bunch of them. Oh, let's start with mass incarceration. And he didn't even say that with a lot of confidence, right? Charlamagne, brother, in 2023, systemic racism arguments are dead, bro. They're dead. And you should have known that. You should have done your homework knowing you knew who Larry Elder was. Y'all, some of y'all, Teslin Figueroa had done. She said, I know what you think about reparations. Y'all didn't do y'all homework. Systemic racism arguments in 2023 are dead. The actual term systemic racism, fam, you gotta let that thing go. And anybody who's watching this saying that, you gotta let that go. And let me explain why. The word systemic typically means what most people hear with the dictionary, at least one of the definitions. Here's what the definition of systemic is: of, relating to, or common to a system, especially when affecting the entirety of a thing. All right. So when you talk about systemic racism, what you're saying is that the whole system is racist. The system is geared in a racist way. And you say the criminal justice system. And Larry Elder pushes back, right? Here's the problem with calling it systemic racism today. Here's the problem. Because when you say it's systemic, you're saying racism is common to a system, in particular the criminal justice system, and it's affecting the entirety of a thing. Now, that may not be what you meant, bro, but that's what it means, and that's how most people will take that. Systemic racism means the whole system is racist. Brother, I'm living proof that that's not true. In 1997, I was facing 43 years in prison for a broad day shootout with a rival gang. 43 years. I went to court. The judge asked me some questions. I shared my background. I spoke it with the greatest diction I could ever spoke. You'd have thought I went to school with Carlton in that courtroom. No street slang came out of my mouth at all that day. The judge knocked away all the felony charges. I pled guilty to possession of a gun and reckless endangerment. And he sentenced me to 20 months and suspended the vast majority of it. I did less than 2 months being locked up, from 43 years to 2 months. And one of his reasons why is because he said, I want you to go to college. You seem too smart to be in prison. This was an old white judge who I didn't know at that moment. I found out a year later, he gave the third highest prison sentences in the state of Maryland. Brother, I'm living proof that the whole system is not racist. And I know other people who have dodged bullets. I've been pulled over by police many a times, and I'm a big, black, intimidating dude, and I've walked away laughing and joking with them. To say that systemic racism exists today, you can't give any solid proof. Now, if you, Charlamagne, if you were trying to say, well, the prison system throughout its history has been systemically racist, 100%. I mean, we'll talk about this in a minute, but you go back to the Black Codes of 1865, that what happened was the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, except, but it put a provision in there, except for when people are incarcerated or imprisoned. So then all of a sudden in the South, they came up with all these vagrancy laws. You can't even be standing outside talking on the street or you're breaking the law. Black people were going to jail for 20 years for jaywalking. This stuff is all documented. I'm not giving you every receipt, but I keep a lot of receipts though. I got 3 boys that we got to go shopping a lot. I keep receipts. You'll get some of those today. But if you want to say it was systemically racist from 1865 up until now, that okay, cool. That would be legitimate. I think there were a lot of people. I mean, and this even came up on the show, even the crack versus coke epidemic, right? The war on drugs was largely disproportionately affected and put black people in prison way longer for a particular drug than white people. Even today. So anyway, that's a real thing. Okay, you can make a case that it has been, but today here's the better word. Systemic is the wrong word. Systematic is the right word. If you're going to make a case that there's racism within the system, then systematic is the right word. Here's what systematic means. Of, relating to, or common to a system. Given to or using a system or method, methodical, right? You could make the case that within the criminal justice system that racism shows itself up. I think 100%. I do not think that all the sentences are fair. Even things like recidivism, things like that, like determining your prison sentence based on the likelihood that you'll go back to all those. There are things that are stacked against the kind of communities that black people come from. So there can be systematic things, right? Even in the loan industry, you could go to a bank and the banker not want to give you a loan and find ways to get around it because he doesn't want you because you're black. He may judge that you have bad credit, all that stuff. Those things can happen, but that's not systemic. Listen, I bought a home 2 years ago. I bought the home. I got my credit together. I bought a home, got the loan in my name alone. Didn't even put my wife's name on the loan. I got the loan. I got a crazy credit score, right? My credit score wasn't even amazing, but I got a 3.25% for my rate. A year later, them things were doubled, 2.5 times that rate. The Lord was good. I got in, right? I'm a big black dude. You walk in and think like the last thing I want him to do. You can't say it's systemic, but you can make a case that there are things that are systematic. But if you're going to say that, then what sin issues aren't systematic? Everything happens outside of it, inside of a system. You got people who are sinful inside of systems. That all happens, right? So but to call it systematic, brother, Charlamagne, you got systemic. You got to get yourself together, man. You sound like you've been reading too much Stokely Carmichael, man. Those days are over in that sense, and that's what Larry Elder's pushing back against. All right. Having said that, I want to talk to Mr. Larry Elder, my brother. So you came on the Breakfast Club and you said you were voting for running as a MAGA conservative, and you said that your platform, one of your main platforms, was fatherlessness in the black community. All right. And you said, and you gave some stats and you talked about and examples of black kids out in California running into stuff and doing all these things, right? I don't think that's unique to black children, to be honest. I think it's unique to the kind of culture that we live in. I mean, even in I've watched hockey teams win the Stanley Cup, and they run out in the streets and terrorize the streets, burn stuff, break cars, run in. So that's not necessarily unique to black people, but for the purpose of this conversation, we'll say that it is. All right. And your concern is that it's the fatherlessness in the home that is causing this, and that's the number one problem. And that's a typical talking conservative point. From Candace Owens to Charlie Kirk, all of them, PragerU, everyone has that perspective. Fatherlessness is more detrimental to the black community than racism from white people is. And I got to be honest, I do agree on many levels with that. I think there's some wisdom in that. But I think it's a little bit misleading to say that. And let me explain why. First, if you're going to say fatherlessness is in the black community, here's the problem with what Larry Elder said. I'm paraphrasing, but this is essentially his words. And you can go back and watch the interview. He said, from the 1940s to the 1960s, where there was black people were 87% under poverty. I think these were his numbers. He even acknowledged his mom and dad were from Jim Crow South. All right. He acknowledged that. He said that from the 40s to the 60s was the greatest economic growth for black people. It went from like 87% under poverty. It dropped down. I can't remember what he said. I don't want to misquote him because there's always people who are literalists. That's not what he said. He said 30%, not 28. Man, I ain't trying to hear all that, man. Listen, if you on them type terms, man, you shouldn't be on YouTube watching these type of conversations. All right. But he basically made the point that fatherlessness in the black community didn't really happen until democratic policies came from Lyndon Johnson. And I was surprised he actually said this point. He started off by saying well-intended, well-meaning. I usually don't hear him say that at all about anything the Democrats do. So I thought either he's just playing around, or maybe he actually thinks that they really meant well. He contradicted himself on that later on, but we'll get to that. So he said that Lyndon Johnson, the Great Society policies, after the civil rights legislation came, there was what they call the welfare state. And to use his language, he said something like this, that the government went door to door. He said, I remember this. They went door to door to talk about how you would qualify for these things. And by doing that, basically made women marry the government and stay married to the government and not other men. So this is what Larry Elder said. If you watched it, then you heard him say this. I'm paraphrasing. Okay, and let's just say that these were his words, right? So if he's right, which I think he is on some level, then fatherlessness in the black community is a relatively new phenomenon. It's within the last 6 decades. And it's not it's risen, obviously, even in the white community. He said it went from, I think, 8% to now 25% of white people are born without a father. And in the black community, I think he said it's 77%. So it's a new phenomenon. Fatherlessness in the home is roughly 6 decades old. And he's saying that's the greatest problem in the black community. Fatherlessness. And he said in general. Here's the concern I have with that statement. While I do believe I'm a black dad, I'm not a black father. Fathers have sex and have babies. I'm a dad. I got married, had sex, had babies, and raised them. I got 3 boys, 15, 14, and 12, right? Love them. Those are my dudes. So I'm sensitive to the black dad's joint. I'm sensitive to that. And I agree that that's a big problem in the black community. But when you make that the platform, I feel like that only works when you talk about the black community. And here's why I'm saying that. I'm going to make a statement now about America. Now, I know America officially started in 1776, but colonists came from England in 1607. So as an idea of going to a new country and trying to develop it to become a different nation, that started in 1607. It became America in 1776, but it's still the same northern continental idea, right? Which wasn't called America then. It was called the New Land or whatever it was called. America right now is roughly 400, because it's 2023, so we're talking 416 years old, all right? From 1619 to 1865, 249 years, slavery was the norm, okay? So 249 years was that. And then from 1865 until 1967, to the Fair Housing Act, there was Jim Crow. All right. I guess you could say 64, Jim Crow ended, but there was still a lot going on. It took a little bit of time for it to be implemented. So now you're talking 348 years of America's 416 years. So that's a roughly 80-something% of America's lifespan has been marred by slavery, Jim Crow, and things like that. Okay? According to Larry Elder, fatherlessness is a new phenomenon that's happened over the last 60 years, right? So for those 348 years that I'm talking about where slavery and Jim Crow happened, fathers were in the home. They were in the home. I would say that those 348 years with fathers in the home caused more moral decadence in America than the fatherlessness that's not in the home that we've seen the last few decades. The fathers in the home did more damage to the children. Those fathers, those men who owned slaves and transferred them to their children and taught them, they did more damage to the moral, the idea of America as the land of the free more damage was done by fathers in the home than fatherlessness. It's a new phenomenon. So if you're going to say that fatherlessness is your platform and that's the main issue, then what do you say to all of the fathers who were in the home that created the laws and the hatred and the anger and the bigotry and the rape that were in the home? And this is my problem with conservative talking points. You're only pushing back against Democrats. It's a far deeper problem than fatherlessness because fathers in the home did more damage to the moral fabric of this nation than the fatherlessness that's not in the home. And don't make me say something I'm not saying. I think it's a problem. As a black dad, I'm with you. But when you make that your platform, it's almost like a aha, like this is the real issue. It's like, brother, fathers in the home, white fathers in the home did way more damage than the black fathers who were not in the home. It's a new phenomenon. America didn't start 60 years ago and black people just showed up and this is how it was happening in the black community. It started hundreds of years ago. So what do you say to the fathers in the home if you're saying fatherlessness is the problem? Nah, it only works when you do it against the black community. Because fathers in the home in the white community decimated the black community. But that's all I'm saying is just be honest. Just be honest. Listen, wrote your platform, but be honest. Listen, we don't want partisan politicians. We want truth. We want truth. Well, I'm a man. I want truth. I trust history. I think history is right. I want truth. I want truth. Here's the other problem with the fatherlessness in the black community argument. While it is true, I don't hear any real partisan policies coming from conservatives who keep touting that issue. Even on the show, Larry Elder didn't give any policies. He gave advice. He said, if you work hard in school and you don't have sex out, you don't have children out of wedlock, and you're an entrepreneur and you go to college and you won't be, okay. But there are tons of people who didn't do any of those things who are not doing well in the culture. It's just, to me, when you say these things, they're an oversimplification of a much deeper reality. There's no way that the government just showed up and women were like, oh, okay, well, shoot, I'm gonna get rid of my man. I don't want to be loved or touched by anybody. I just want that check. And the dads were like, well, all right, well, shoot, I'm gonna go ahead and just leave. Nah, it's more complicated than that. And let me say this. Well, actually, I'll come back to that. It's just more complicated. But I didn't hear any real policy. I don't ever hear policies from any of these people. What I hear is accusations, not solutions. That's advice. What policies? How are you going to make laws that people stay in the home, that fathers stay in the home? That's a different conversation, and I'm actually going to address that in a different video. All right. Fatherlessness in the black community. That's one problem. I just think, man, fathers in the home did more damage than the fathers that aren't in the home. It's a new phenomenon. America didn't get here. It's not 60 years old. What do you say about all those fathers who were in the home that caused significant moral destruction? All right. Next thing. Larry Elder was big on saying, he said this a couple times, and he's right on one level, but it's misleading. All right. He said on a few occasions, the Democrats are the party of slavery and the party of Jim Crow. And on many levels, he's right. The Democrats were the ones who wanted slavery. Lincoln was a Republican. And when the Civil War was that, it was Republicans versus liberals on one level, versus Democrats. But that's a misleading statement. And let me tell you why. In 1865, in the South, the Democrats, they enacted what was called the Black Codes. So there were two things happening at the same time, different terminology. The Democrats had the Black Codes, which were laws that were targeting of not allowing black people to enjoy the freedom that they had come with. It was those Black Codes would eventually become Jim Crow. And I'm going to tell you why that happened. And then you have what's called the Reconstruction era from the North. So after the Civil War, the North stayed in the southern part of the country with soldiers there to help black people transition from slaves to citizens, right? But there was still a lot of violence, a lot of intimidation, trying to get black people not to vote. All those things were relatively happening at the same time. And so the North was there, just like we have soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan. We're there because we keep the peace, right? The North was there to keep the peace, even though there was still violence and stuff going on. Whites were still killing, targeting, intimidating black people and so forth, right? That was from 1865, that was on. And then 1877, something changed. And you can Google this. It's called the Compromise of 1877. This is not Marxist woke. This is just American history. All right, so the presidential campaign of 1876 had two men, one Republican, one Democrat. The Republican was Rutherford B. Hayes, and the Democrat was Samuel Tilden out of New York. All right. Well, at that time, the electoral number was 185. Now it's 220, but you need 185 votes to become president. Samuel Tilden had 184. The holdup, there was a big problem in the South. There were 3 states in the South that were still controlled by Republicans. South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida were still Republican controlled. And the Republicans were saying that the Democrats are intimidating and killing and stopping black people from voting, which is why Samuel Tilden is seemingly winning. That was what was happening. Isn't that funny how they still say that today? But it was really happening back then. It was real, right? So what happened was Republicans with Rutherford B. Hayes met with Southern Democrats in Wormley Hotel in Washington, D.C. in 1877. And they basically came to this agreement. The Democrats said, we will not dispute the presidency and let Rutherford B. Hayes have it, but we want you to pull out all of the troops from the North, pull them out of the South, all of them. Republicans agreed. Okay? They agreed. Now, keep in mind, remember recently when we saw people trying to run into the airplane when America was pulling out of Afghanistan when Joe Biden did that. Remember, we saw people like crying on because they knew once America leaves that it's going to be chaos. The Republicans, they wanted the presidency. So in 1877, they agreed mutually, Democrats, you give us the presidency, we're going to pull all the troops out of the South. And that's exactly what happened. And they knew when they pulled those troops out of the South that it was going to be World War I. It was psychological. It was going to be warfare against black people. Black people had no hope then. The only confidence black people had back then, besides just a sense of self-worth, was that the North was there and would intervene in matters. And it wasn't even perfect. But you pulled out of the South. And when you did that, it went from slavery to segregation. Those black codes became what we now call Jim Crow. Jim Crow was a black minstrel show where a white dude would put black paint on his face and and make white people laugh, right? That's why it's called Jim Crow. Those laws became the Jim Crow laws, and they were laws that restrict. They were basically, you know what Jim Crow laws were? They were basically what we would call today economic sanctions against black people for being black. And since the 13th Amendment only allowed sort of slavery conditions that happen when you're incarcerated, all these laws were black people were getting arrested in droves because they were saying, oh, you don't work, you don't do this, you don't do that, you got to, and then you go to prison and end up working for the same thing you were doing when you were a slave, right? The North pulled out, the Republicans pulled out so that Rutherford B. Hayes could be president. So don't, Larry Elder, just be honest, bro. Like, I'm not saying, that doesn't mean the Democrats good or the, nah, they all wild to me. But let's just be honest. We want truth, right? You pulled out of the South. The Republicans pulled out of the South, knowing that that was going to be destructive, and they never went back. So all that talk about, well, we had a civil war, isn't that enough? Yeah, but then you allowed another war to happen by pulling out of the South just for political gain. So you can miss me with the, oh, well, there was a civil war that happened. Isn't that enough for black people? Nah, because you allowed Jim Crow to take place because you wanted to maintain control of the presidency. Let's just be honest. Let's just be honest. That's all we're asking for. So Jim Crow was a bipartisan effort. Jim Crow was not just the Democrats. The Republicans paved the way for that. All right? We're just being honest. Google it. Google it. The 1877 compromise. If I'm wrong, I will make a video saying I was wrong. This is all historical fact. This is what happened. All right. The next thing that I thought was kind of interesting. So in the interview, Larry Elder highlighted that Martin Luther King, a couple of years after the I Have a Dream speech, he quoted him, and he's paraphrasing, I'm sure, because none of us are really good with the quotations. But he essentially said that Martin Luther King essentially said, man, things are going so well that in 40 years we could have a black president. And he said, look, right on cue, we had a black president, Obama. Now, I don't think he was saying that to say MLK was a prophet or something, but he was making the point that he saw back then that the racism had changed in 1966 and predicted that. And that could be true. Larry Elder, Candace Owens, these people, they don't always, they present ideas very quickly and confidently, but they never present the data. Like I'm telling you, Google these things and you can find this out, right? So let me present some data, because Martin Luther King, let's say he said that in 1966. Here's what Martin Luther King said in an interview in 1967, a year later after what Larry Elder was saying. Now, you know my channel, when I get to 5,000 views, 5,000 subs, I'm going to step up the production value. But for now, we're just going to do it gangster the way we always do it. So I'm going to show you on my phone, but this was 11 months before his assassination. Here's Martin Luther King in interview. You can go find this. It says, it's MLK talks new phase of civil rights struggle. Listen to what he said a year after what Larry Elder said, that he was kind of praising what's happening and that there'll be a president in 40 years, which became true in Obama. But listen to what Martin Luther King said after that interview.
When you stood on the Lincoln Memorial that day in August '63, and you said, I had a dream, did that dream envision that you could see a war in Asia, preventing the federal government doing for the Negroes, preventing the society doing for the Negroes, that which you think had to be done?
No, I didn't envision that then. I must confess that that period was a great period of hope for me. And I'm sure for many others all across the nation, many of the Negroes who had about lost hope, saw a solid decade of progress in the South. And in 1954, which was, 64, 1963, 9 years after the Supreme Court's decision to be in the March on Washington, meant a great deal. It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism, and I think
Okay, from his own words, after the interview that Larry Elder is quoting, he's saying, yeah, it was a bit naive. It was, some of that old optimism has been tempered with realism, right? So this is, now mind you, when he's saying that, this is after the Civil Rights Act of 1964, right? The Voting Rights Act of 1965. I don't know if this was before, after the Fair Housing Act of 1967. I don't know, because I don't know the actual date of the interview. But he's basically saying, and this is why it makes me laugh when conservatives act like Martin Luther King was loving it after, like, he thought systemic racism ended in 1964. That is not what he said in 1967. That's a 1967 interview. He said, and you can go back and watch it. You find it yourself. He said with his own mouth that, man, it was a bit naive. It was a time of hope, but I've had to do a lot of soul searching and realize and temper a lot of that hope. There's still a lot of work to be done. This was after those laws had been passed, right? So stop using MLK as like, oh, he would be cool with it. He wasn't. He was saying things to uplift people, but he's acknowledging, man, what I thought in 1963 was going to happen then, it was naive. Those are his own words. All right. Next thing. I'm just trying to be honest. You can be mad at me if you want. I'm not a conservative or a liberal. I've never voted Democrat in my life, but you can accuse me of that, and that will be fine. Because I got a wife, I got kids, I got a home. I'm getting ready to go to New York with my son. I don't really care if you think I'm woke. I ain't sleep on the right or woke on the left. This is just fact, right? All right, let's talk Lyndon Johnson and the Great Society. Let's just be honest about this for a second. Because they don't say it this way, but usually conservatives make it seem like black people just just left all values to join the welfare system. Let's just, can we stop talking about policies and talk about people for a minute? Let's go back mentally to 1964, right? If you're black in that day and age, you've known nothing but mistreatment for just being black in the history of the nation. You're tired, you're exasperated, you're afraid, you got children you want to see grow up. They're bombing black girls in churches. All these different things are happening. It is a tumultuous time and all you want is to just be treated. You got Martin Luther King, this young dude comes out in the 50s and he's marching and it looks like there's hope. And there was a march on Washington that had hundreds of thousands of people. And it seems like, man, we finally going to get there and get to the promised land. And then all this stuff is happening, right? Then Kennedy gets killed and you lose a little hope. And then Lyndon Johnson shows up and then he is saying, we're going to take this and run with it, right? If you're black in that day, or even poor white, anyone who just feels disenfranchised, but largely it was black people, and the government says to you, hey, listen, we're going to give you money to help you get off of your feet. Why in the world would you not take it or believe it? Like, let's just be clear. The way that everything about the political system is based on trusting the government. Everything that we're supposed to be told is to trust the founding fathers, trust the government. So if you're black in that day and age and they come to you and say, we're going to give you money, you don't know that it's going to lead to a welfare. You don't know that. You're finally glad that the government is acting like they care about you, because from as long as you can remember, your people who look like you in this country have not been treated as such. You've had to fight through so many obstacles just to make ends meet. So when Lyndon Johnson offers this great society, of course you're going to take it. Of course you are, right? People do stuff. We enter the sweepstakes and try to win. Of course you will, right? You got to stop blaming black people for believing that, right? And I'm going to get to why more in a second. But just think about that for a second. If you're that person, let me tell you, this is going to make black people mad. But let me tell you what happened with black people then, and I think happens now, particularly with the left. I think a lot of black people have Stockholm Syndrome. That's what happened back then. I don't know if you know what Stockholm Syndrome is. Stockholm Syndrome is essentially a mental disorder that a person either loves or agrees with their captor. Like say you get kidnapped, right? And then you start, defending the captor, falling in love with them, agreeing with them. Some women even get into sexual relations with people or pretend like they're, because you're mentally, you're just trying to survive. You're trying to make it. And I think a lot of people in the black community have a Stockholm Syndrome. We're so, especially back then, you're so used to being lied to being mistreated, that when someone says to you, hey, we with you, we got you, you forget that they're the party that voted against you. They're the party that, and as a matter of fact, here's the thing. As a matter of fact, you forget all that they've done. You just forgive it because you just want to be accepted. You just want to be cared for. And so you get a Stockholm Syndrome towards the Democrats, these people. But the Republicans haven't been jumping in there to help out either. The Democrats are at least pretending like, right? So all this is happening. I think a lot of people have like a Stockholm Syndrome to the Democratic Party, particularly black people, especially back then when all that stuff was happening. That's the reality. All right, let's talk about this. So Larry Elder mentioned that Obama, when Charlamagne and them were talking about fair housing and all of that stuff, Larry Elder talked about a 1995 lawsuit where Obama and a bunch of other lawyers and stuff sued some bank, and the banks said for discrimination, and the banks were like, all right, fine, we'll give you these loans. And then he said a year later, they followed up, most of these people lost their homes. And his point is basically there's no discrimination. It's just credit. If you don't have the credit, you're not going to get the loan. That's what he's basically saying. And he brought that lawsuit back up as if like that proves the case. All right, so here's the problem with that. Again, I don't think that racism is systemic. I think it can be systematic. But here's the problem with Larry Elder's perspective on that. All right. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this on the screen very well, but this is an article that was written in 2017. This is June 18th, 2017. It's a Reuters article, and the headline says this. This is 2017, not 1995. JP Morgan agrees to $55 million settlement of mortgage discrimination complaint, right? Let me read just a little bit of this article to you. JP Morgan Chase and Company has agreed to pay $55 million to settle a U.S. Justice Department lawsuit accusing it of discriminating against minority borrowers by allowing mortgage brokers to charge them more for home loans, a person familiar with the matter said yesterday. The U.S. Justice Department complaint filed in Manhattan Federal Court on Wednesday accused the bank of willfully violating the U.S. Fair Housing Act and the Equal Credit Opportunity Act between 2006 and 2009 and showing reckless disregard for the rights of at least 53,000 African American and Hispanic home buyers. All right, that's not 1995, fam. This is a lawsuit that they settled in 2017 that's showing 53,000 people. That's a lot of people, bro. Now, maybe not in the grand scheme of the country, but that's a lot of people. And JP Morgan settled. You can say that doesn't mean they're guilty. Whatever, man. J.P. Morgan settled because you can go find this article anywhere, right? It says, there's more. Oh, there's more. All right, let's go to this article right here. All right. This article right here is 2018. All right. This is written by Reveal. It's called For People of Color, Banks Are Shutting the Door to Home Ownership. Now, I know you can't see this, but let me read. I'm keeping it on the screen because you can zoom in or you can Google this and see where it is and see that I'm saying this. Let me read to you this. I thought this was actually really interesting right here. Where does it say this at? Because this is a conservative, actually, who is pushing back here. Where is this dude at? Where we at? No, don't do this. Where we at? I'm sorry, guys. I'm got too much going on, and I'm trying to find this article. The point of the article. Let me see where we at. Okay, here we go. All right. So at the end of this article, here's what it says. It says in an April policy paper, the American Bankers Association said reporting credit scores would be. Let me give you some context. People are trying to get. They're saying that there's discrimination. The banks are not allowing people to investigate to have the credit scores. Okay, so they're not allowed to invest. The bank is not releasing the credit scores, but people are saying you're discriminating against race, not credit scores. And so there's this back and forth. This is 2018. There's a back and forth over this. And here's what part of the article says. In an April policy paper, the American Bankers Association said reporting credit scores would be expensive and cloud any focus. The disclosure law has an identifying discrimination against the largest bank, J.P. Morgan Chase and Company, has argued that the data should remain closed off even to academics, right? And then this, the decades-old credit scoring model currently used does not take into account consumer data on rent, utility, and cell phone bill payments. Republican Senator Tim Scott of South Carolina wrote in August when he unveiled a bill to require the federal government to vet credit standards used for residential mortgages. This exclusion disproportionately hurts African Americans, Latinos, and young people who are otherwise credit worthy. All right. That's 2018. Larry Elder, what are you talking about 1995 for? Be honest with people. This stuff still happens. Don't just say, yeah, we know racism exists, as if it happens in some ethereal, enigmatic. No, it happens in real time to real people. These aren't all people who are woke or believe in the left narrative. One more point. Look at this article right here. This is from the Chicago Tribune, right? The title of the article was called Modern Day Redlining, How Banks Block Black People of Color. This is February 17th, 2018. Listen to this. 50 years after the Federal Housing Act banned racial discrimination in lending, African Americans and Latinos continue to be routinely denied conventional mortgage loans at rates far higher than their white counterparts. This modern-day redlining persisted in 61 metro areas, even when controlling for applicants' income, loan amount, and neighborhood. According to millions of Home Mortgage Disclosure Act records analyzed by Reveal and the Center for Investigative Reporting, the year-long analysis based on 31 million records relied on techniques used by leading academics, the Federal Reserve, and the Department of Justice to identify lending disparities. So listen, man, I'm not saying that it's systemic, but I'm saying is like, stop talking about 1995, but just be honest. Like, I'm not voting for Democrats or Republicans. I don't care. But at least be honest. Like, people still think that we care about partisan politics. And maybe some people do. There are some issues that are important to many Americans and believers alike, right? But let's just be clear. We care more about honesty, like truth. Larry Elder was not being truthful. Now, you may have thought he destroyed the Breakfast Club, and he very well might have. But is that what we care about? Is that more important than truth? Like, we just want truth, man. And maybe you don't. Maybe you don't want truth. Because I'm a Christian, because I'm a fear of the Lordian, because I believe that the Bible is true and what it says, I care about truth. So I will present truth even if it ruffles people's feathers. If you don't care about truth, then go ahead and celebrate that Larry Elder destroyed the Breakfast Club. But he wasn't being truthful. he wasn't being truthful. It's more complicated than just the Democrats are the party of this, that the welfare state destroyed the black community. Those things are aspects of truth, but it's way more complicated than that. And he and everybody knows it. Lastly, I promise, I know this was a long video, but I've been waiting because I've been seeing people going in like, look what happened. But we got to be honest here, right? Lastly, all right. So DJ Envy, towards the end of the interview, right, he asked Larry Elder, why should black people vote for the GOP? And Larry Elder, paraphrasing, but he said because of these policies. At one point, Charlamagne was asking, do white people do anything wrong? And then even the lady Teslin Figaro said, what do you disagree with? And he said, well, Republicans spend too much and some other things, right? But when DJ Envy asked, why should black people vote for the GOP? He's talked about policies. And I get it. If you're just thinking they're the party of abortion and LGBT and all that, then I get it. But what I thought was interesting was he didn't give a solid answer. He just said some policies and some different things, right? Here's the problem with telling black people as the answer to vote Republican. And I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm just saying here's the problem with that answer. All right? You told you I go shopping. I go shopping. I keep receipts. Here's the problem. On June 19th, 2020, Larry Elder released a documentary called Uncle Tom, right? An oral history of the American black conservative, all right? This documentary was basically done by him, had Candace Owens and other high-profile black Republicans in it, and the whole point was that they're seen as Uncle Toms by the black community for voting Democrat, all right? That's what he said. And it's an hour and a half, a little over an hour and 40-minute documentary. I actually thought it was pretty decent. They said some stuff about the Democrats that I 100% agree with. I don't know how black people vote for them. But then you can't vote for Republicans either. And here's why. Let me explain why. So at the 1:24, so an hour and 24 minutes and 44 seconds, at that point in the documentary, I couldn't believe that he included this in the documentary, right? But in that documentary, most of the people who were featured, very prominent black conservatives, politicians, some pastors, listen to what they said. This is at the 1:24 minute mark and 44 second mark of the first Uncle Tom documentary. Listen to what they said. I'm going to say the names and everything. Robert Woodson Sr., founder and president of the Woodson Center. Here's what he said in the documentary. He was a black conservative. Here's what he said. Blacks are protesting the fact that for the last 50 years, they are living in cities that are the most dangerous, disinvested places, and they have been run by liberal black Democrats. But they've got no alternative to express that discontent. So he said there's no alternative. Carol Swain, listen to this. Carol Swain, associate professor at Princeton and Vanderbilt Universities, co-chairwoman of the President Trump's 1776 commission. So remember, there was a 1619 commission of people who said that racism is embedded in the history of America. Then there was a 1776. She was chairwoman for President Trump. Here's what she said, Carol Swain. First day Republicans have to be serious about whether they want minorities in the party. And if they are, they need to totally rethink how they're going about it. My experiences running as a mayoral candidate in a city that's predominantly Democrat, I've been criticized by Republican strategists for spending my time in minority communities. I have not found the kind of support that I expected from Republicans. When I've gone to campaign and election meetings, I hear strategists say, don't waste your money in minority communities. You need to hunt where the ducks are. That's Carol Swain, co-chairman in the documentary of black conservatives, saying the conservatives do not care about black people. This isn't Black Lives Matter saying this. This is black conservatives saying this in the. I couldn't believe he put in the documentary. I was actually grateful he did. I thought it showed some integrity. Let's keep going. Allen West, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. Here's what he said. That's the fault of the Republican Party. They have just completely said, we can't connect with them, and they gave up. Republicans have been their own worst messengers. Larry Elder, right? This is what he said about that in the documentary. For years, the Democratic Party had assumed they're going to get 90 to 95% of the black vote, as did the Republican Party. They didn't even try. Republicans have convinced themselves that blacks are unalterably Democrats. There's nothing we can do about it. Let's husband our money and our energy and just spend it where we think we can get votes. All right? Rob Smith, rising star in the Republican Black Party, said this. You're not going to be able to sell your ideas and your theories and your thoughts to the people if you're doing the things in the same way that you have done them for the last 20 or 30 years. All right. Those are quotes from the Uncle Tom documentary by black Republicans, conservatives. Some of them high up, prominent black conservatives are all saying the Republican Party does not want or care about the black vote. So Larry Elder, in all sincerity, why are you on the Breakfast Club telling black people to vote for the GOP because of some policies when they're saying if they don't care? Listen, the whole premise of politics, the reason why we vote for people is we believe, based on what they say to us in their speeches, that they have our best interest at heart, right? That's what we vote. We want the people to demonstrate our core values, our interests. They call them my constituents. We're the constituencies. We're the ones that... You're telling black people in your documentary that these white people, conservatives, do not care about you or your vote or the things you value. So that means they're not going to create any policies for you. But yet the answer is to vote Republican, to vote the GOP. Larry Elder, that's disingenuous, my brother. This is in your documentary. This is not a Black Lives Matter manifesto. I'm telling you, I got receipts. I go shopping. I got plenty more, but this video is already too long. This is the longest video I've done, but I needed to make this out there. I know many people may not watch it, listen to it twice the speed, whatever, but let's just be clear about it. Let's just be clear. Here's the issue. Racism is not a matter of the heart. It's a matter of the heart, not a matter of the law. While things have definitely changed for the better, here's the reality. People weren't racist because the law made them that way. They weren't racist because the law said you have to be this way. People went against the grain all the time. People break laws all the time. People were racist because they were allowed to be. And laws have changed, and the country is nowhere like what it was. We're in a different place now. But I think what's happened is many black people have just been so... I think you know what I think really happened? I think a lot of black people have tried to really believe in what the American dream is. And I think expected that the American dream would mean the elimination of racism or anything that has historically held black people back. And I think in that sense, black people have not understood that we're talking about the human condition. Like you're never going to eradicate racism. So all this anti-racism, all that stuff, it's cute. It may sound like it, but in reality, you're never going to eradicate it because it's a sin like any other. Do anti-sex outside of marriage, anti-whatever. You're just not going to eradicate it. So, but I think what happened for many black people is the psychological duress. For many people, some people make it. Some people, they make it, but some people don't. And I think that's the human condition. Not everyone is going to make it. Not everyone is going to not see themselves as a victim. Not everyone, and some people have been victimized. Not everyone is portraying the victim, even though many are. So anyway, I've said a lot. I just think, Charlamagne, man, you got to step your game up. You getting too comfortable just being a public figure, and you're not really, you just don't even know what you're talking about sometimes, bro. A lot of times, to be honest. And Larry Elder, man, you're a sharp dude. You discipled Candace Owens. You wrote a book called Stupid Black Men, How to Play the Race Card and Lose. You may have grown up in a black family, but you are out of touch with what resonates with the black community. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't black people who agree with you, because there's a lot you said I agree with, but your position, your stance, the way you use historical facts, it's just misleading, bro. Just be honest. I think you claim to be a Christian on the thing. At least I don't know you. You claim to be a believer in the way you were talking about God. Man, then be about truth, bro. Truth isn't just black people have fatherlessness in the home. It's broader than that. It's deeper than that. And unless we're gonna deal with all of that, you ain't gonna never be president with that platform, famo. I can tell you that right now. This is coming from a nobody, an ex-gangster that's already running late that has to go to the gym in a minute. Having said all that, man, I appreciate y'all watching. I've been on vacation with my family, so I've been making videos. I'm on vacation with my oldest son. We going away tomorrow for a couple days. That kind of ends the vacation. And then I'm going to get back in the booth, man. I got a lot to talk about. So thanks for riding with me. Thanks for putting up with the no sound. I appreciate y'all. Tony, thanks for hitting me saying ain't no sound. The Emperor has no clothes on. Thanks for telling me that. I appreciate y'all. Share the video. Like, comment, all that for the algorithm. You know it's racist. All right, y'all. Grace and peace.